So today we're going to talk about the bind meta and why the bind meta might be a bit more interesting than it has been in the past. Now, of course, throughout bind's history of being in this game for quite some time now, the general meta on bind has been pretty familiar, right? You're almost pretty much going to play Brim, you're pretty much always going to play Raze, you're going to play a lot of Viper, and then you're going to see some mishmash of initiators and maybe the odd Sentinel in there as well. And there has been one game so far played in China on bind, and BLG very much fit that mold, right? When you look at this comp, yeah, okay, KO is perhaps a little bit strange, but you know, this looks like a bind comp, right? This is kind of what we're used to seeing. However, Tyloo, who they were playing against, actually went in a bit of a different direction, where, yeah, okay, we've still got Viper in there, and Fade is a normal pick as well, but Omen instead of Brim, double duelist without a Raze, Neon, and Yoru. This was clearly a very different direction, and what I would call Tyloo's comp here, right, is basically we're just going to play the agents that we think are good, right? Omen in general is better than Brim. Most people would agree with that. Viper is very good. You know, Fade is a good pick. Yoru and Neon are probably the two best duelists right now. So we're just going to pick all of kind of the best agents and make that our meta. And that is where I think bind might get a little bit more interesting than you might necessarily think. Now, it might not play out that way, but one thing you might not have realized is that actually when we were playing bind back during kickoff, it actually was more interesting as well than you might have thought, because here is my graph from that time of, you know, what people were playing and their win rates and stuff, and you can see here that of the archetypes on bind, the no Senti Viper stuff, you know, the kind of stuff that we just saw from BLG, that still was the most played overall, but at other times in bind's history, this has been at like 80%. But this time at kickoff, it was only, you know, just below 40%. And actually, there was some double Senti comps in there with no Viper whatsoever. There was also some no Viper with a Sentinel playing double Initiator in there that, as you see, saw quite a bit of play. It was actually a bit more successful in terms of win rate as well. And then some teams were even playing what I call a Gen G comp on bind, which is where you play a Cypher and a Viper, let's say, in the same comp and just go solo Initiator. And that's the thing. I think that in kickoff, you know, this map had some potential. There was quite a few different things being played and different things finding success as well, which actually kind of, you know, made me excited for bind and, you know, seeing the direction that we would have gone in on that map. However, I think now we know that, you know, it probably would have ended up just being very Teo dominated, probably would have seen, you know, a lot of just like Teo double Initiator Viper if I had to guess. However, now we are in a post Teo world. I think it has opened up things again, right? Like we saw with the Tyloo comp there, you know, playing double duelist potentially, and that actually looking like an option that you could potentially play, right? We talk about, you know, you look at BLG's comp with a KO. I could definitely see a lot of teams replacing KO with Yoru in that comp, right? And actually double duelist becoming something that you do see, whether that's Yoru Neon or Yoru Raze. I think that, you know, seems like a potential very obvious option, right? That Yoru is an agent that we've seen on bind, obviously, all the way back in the day with like Paper Rex or even Sentinels running Yoru on bind before, right? That was kind of Yoru's map before Yoru even became any good, right? So it seems possible that now everyone agrees that Yoru is very good, that Yoru might also see some play on bind, and we might get some interesting comps. But as we saw there as well, double Senti, I think, is an idea that is taking off. And that is what I think is so interesting about bind, is so many of these different things that were being played during kickoff now seem potentially better, right? Like in where we are right now, the double Senti comps, whether that's playing, you know, Vice Cypher or Deadlock, of course, on this map, seems like it would go, you know, extremely hard on bind as well with the Gravnet and the wall. It does seem like double Senti is a potential option as well, and actually could be a decent counter to the Viper comps. And with the nerfing of initiators like Teo and Sky, who have kind of become the initiators that people aren't as excited to play, of course, arguably for Teo and Sky, bind is a map that suits them best, ideally, right? And so you still might see some of those agents, maybe, right? Like if people really wanted to, I suppose bind could be the map where you do still play those agents. But of course, you'll get other people being like, those agents just aren't that viable, and so wanting to play kind of different initiators that might not suit bind quite as well. The one thing that I think might change from where we were at kickoff is that we did see quite a lot of comps that weren't playing Viper whatsoever. I do think that now, though, we seem to have shifted back to Viper. We have seemed to have come right back to Viper is very good. In fact, Viper was the second most picked agent in Masters Toronto, and on maps where Viper wasn't seeing like a ton of play beforehand, like on Sunset, now a lot of teams, a lot of the best teams are playing Viper on a map like Sunset. And so that does make me think that, okay, if Viper is popular enough and people think Viper is good enough to see play maps on like Sunset, then it would seem likely that people, are going to go back to Viper on a map like Bind, that everyone knows that Viper is very good there. So I suspect that we will probably see quite a lot of Viper. However, I do think that the rest of it is quite open, right? In terms of the initiator choices that we see, I think that is very, very open. Whether it's playing solo initiator or double initiator, there's a lot of different potential combos that you could use, and also maybe bringing Yoru in that to kind of be that hybrid initiator duelist in there as well. I could definitely see that happening as well. But as I say, we could see a lot of different archetypes as well. It could be double duelist versus double sentinel versus double initiator, right? We're already playing double controller. There might be no sentinels for some people. There might be 2 for some people, right? There's really a potential vast array of things that could happen on Bind. And right now with where the meta is in terms of it feels very open, right? There isn't necessarily an agent that you kind of must play on all maps, especially a map like Bind that isn't going to be an Omen map, you would think. But maybe some people just think that Omen is strong enough, like Tyloo, that you just have to play Omen, right? And kind of forego Brim and just stick with the Omen on every map all of the time, right? Maybe they think that that's just the best way of playing the map. So I think that basically every single slot, apart from maybe Viper, is somewhat open and could lead to some very diverse, very different comps, very different archetypes of comps on this map. And so I think that right now, Bind is in a position that it should be pretty good watch.